Another episode where I have one of these. Oh, this is a good bottle of wine right here.
What does this one do?
Dun, 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 dun.
If you lift from the bottom, everybody rises. That's propaganda. You attach feelings to words and then you hammer the word over and over until people get that feeling in their bodies.
That feeling?
I'm a good friend. I'm
Mhm.
fun to hang out with. Like, and I'm fun in places that aren't just that, 4-inch tunnel.
Is it only 4 inches?
Nancy, I figured out the back end. So the video,
Bow chicka bow wow.
welcome to another conversation with the Apostate Sisters. I'm Patti, and I make this podcast with my sister Nancy. We grew up in a doomsday cult called the Worldwide Church of God. In this season, we've been wading into the complex topic of autonomy, how control over our bodies was stripped away in the cult environment we were raised in, and how we're reclaiming it. Today, we're tackling patriarchal gender roles in marriage. Specifically, the indoctrination we faced growing up that reinforced strict gender binaries. In the Worldwide Church of God, we were taught that women were to be subservient to men. All the while, men were being conditioned to be dominant and to be emotionally detached. This setup was designed to control our bodies and our lives as much as possible. This problem extends to evangelical churches and, honestly, the culture at large. In this episode, we're unpacking the harmful impact of these teachings and how we're breaking free. Let's get to it.
How we doing today, Pats?
I'm doing okay. How are you doing?
Good. Continuing on our bodily autonomy series, marriage and gender roles.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this topic since we set our schedule and realizing it's almost like purity culture 2.0. It's like we kind of got to see what purity culture led to before we were married in the last episode. And then in this episode, we're looking at what does all of that purity culture indoctrination lead to when you become a grown up and you are seeking to have, relationships and marriages for yourself after that
Yes,
kind of childhood. So, yeah, it's kind of
that
a
is
big deal.
that is kind of what we did. Yeah. Looked at our childhoods and teen years and what we were taught as young girls and now as women. How did that sort of transfer over? How did that shift into us as adults, as wives, as mothers?
It's real nice to be here to talk with you about gender roles in marriage and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
I
Plays
feel
into
like this
purity
is
culture.
it does play into purity culture, and like I see how I leaned into gender roles and still do to an extent.
Mm-hmm.
Like I live a life where I have had a very traditional gender role kind of life. And I never thought it was bad, but I sure don't think it's necessary. I don't think it's required the way that our churches and society would like to have us do it.
Yeah. I don't like being dominated in life, told what to do. Sexually is a different story, but in life, no.
Well, do you think that's what it is? Do you think that in general, the way we think about gender roles in like our church experiences?
I can't speak for everyone out there. I can't speak for all women or men. And I don't want to get necessarily gender specific, but I think we're going to have to just because of things like Christian nationalism and the traditional gender roles within the Christian space.
I think I want to be clear that although this topic will be highly on the binary in terms of talking
Hmm.
about it as men and
Right.
women, we'll be doing that because that is how the church, the Worldwide Church of God, and honestly, every other kind of church I've attended has been about it. They're incredibly on the binary, and then they use that binary to set up a us versus them between men and
Mhm.
women, which I think ultimately is problematic for us. But so we're like kind of missing in this conversation. We'll allude to it, but we will be missing the LGBTQ experience to an extent. So I just
Right.
want to be really clear that I am not intending to leave out that experience, but recognize that that experience has an entirely different set of ramifications
Mhm.
that come out of this binary system for those folks who don't find themselves totally fitting that binary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which more and more people don't these days because they're coming into their own. They're realizing, oh, this is actually who I am, not who, the Christian church was trying to put me into this box. Like, no. But I see what you're saying. Like, we really can't tap into that when talking about traditional, like, gender roles and marriage and patriarchy because their philosophy, one man, one woman for life. I can't think of anything less appealing to me than just that typical, husband, wife, a bunch of kids, Labrador, picket fence. Sounds boring.
I think we wanted it boring. I think that's why we have it, because when there are people in power that want things to stay in their power, it behooves them to control the people that they are in charge of. And setting up a very strict gender binary and very strict gender roles, which
Hmm.
does just take away autonomy from all people, that is how you keep control. People aren't able to be themselves, you own them. And that is just a fact,
Oh, good point. Good point.
especially if you're the one at the finger pointing end of how you need to behave in your gender roles, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a
There's
big damn deal.
so many good guys out there, but at the same time, there's so many men out there that legit do want women to simply just stay in the kitchen, clean the house, take care of the kids while the men go off and do whatever they want.
It's an easy button. The patriarchy has set it up so women create an easy button for men, and that is the thing that needs to go away.
Well, they have lacked their voice for so long. They have not had voices for so long that they don't even know how to stand up for themselves in some cases. Look at Candace Cameron. She says her husband, she's uber Christian. She says, "No, my husband is in charge." Be like, "Why is it not a partnership? It's a partnership. You both are married. You're both autonomous beings. Why does the person with the penis all of a sudden get to call all the shots? And what happens if you disagree with him? That's my question. If a wife is disagreeing with a husband, what happens? He just does whatever he wants and doesn't take her opinion into consideration? How does that work?
Yes, that is what happens. And still today, but for sure a hell of a lot more 50 years ago, first he smacked her across the face and then told her she didn't need to share her opinion, then he did what he wanted to do. So we've made some progress, but fuck, not enough. I think there's a lot of women who end up like they like the assholes. They think
Yeah.
somehow they deserve that because that's what they were conditioned into, to think you're not good enough, you need a man, and then all of us women attach ourselves to a man and then like use the power of our man to best other women. Like the whole thing is fucked up from top to bottom, because we're not because we're not seeing women for the powerful contributors to our society that they actually are. And I would contend the same for children, but that's another episode. So, yeah, this matters. It isn't just the WCG, but we will start there because for us, that was where it started.
Do men really want that subservient wife who doesn't think for herself at all and just does what he tells her? Like, can he possibly feel good about himself?
I think men who are conditioned into it do want that. Or men who don't feel like they're actually that great, when it's all just a front, like, yeah, I want my respect. Yeah, it's because he never felt respected, like actually. And that's why
Goes
you
back
would
to
want that out of a
traumas,
woman. Eh,
right?
yeah. Yeah, of course everything goes back to traumas. So since we both grew up in the WCG and we had a mom and a dad that stayed together and they were in the WCG
Mhm.
together, they were definitely this bright, shining example to us girls of how we should be seeking to behave and who we should be seeking to know. And I will say that I think our experience was really lucky as
Yeah.
kids. Um, Such that, we've heard from other WCG folks through our interview series, where women were not treated well, where women were molested, where women were ignored. It causes a lifelong struggle to own yourself and to do the things for yourself that are good for you, right?
Mhm.
That conditioning just kind of fucks up the barometer of where you should go for actual safety because we had these conditioning things put into us to make us think that asshole guy being married to him, even if he hits me sometimes, is going to make me safe. That's what I need to be safe. That is a fucking problem. So I think the fact that you and I did not experience physical, well, we experienced spanking, as we talked about in our spanking
Mhm.
episode, but we did not experience direct sexual abuse. Um, I would say, so yeah, it's like I almost waver on saying that because I think that the spanking is sexual abuse
Mhm.
because of it being in conjunction with our erogenous zones and everything. But we didn't experience abuse in the same way that I know so many girls growing up in the WCG and other churches of high control did. So in
Oh.
some ways, we were lucky that, you know, we were able to see who it was that we were connecting ourselves to and not just think, oh, I need to be with someone who's beating me because that's how he shows me he cares. Like we literally had a person we interviewed, our dear friend Donna, say that that was the case for her. Like it was so conditioned into her that men are always telling women what to do, that when she was finally with a partner that didn't do that, she thought he didn't love her. And I mean, it's just like I think about that every now and then, and it blows my mind afresh.
That makes me think of an episode of Sex and the City. Also, when Carrie Bradshaw, her character, she's in this great relation. She just got out of her another relationship with Big, and then she goes and she starts her relationship with Aiden, and then she starts waking up in the middle of the night, like having nightmares almost, because she thought, well, what's wrong with me? What's going on? Like she's in a relationship where there's no problems. And so all of a sudden she's like panicking, like there's nothing wrong with this guy. What's going on? I'm panicking. Isn't there supposed to be drama? Isn't there supposed to be angst? That just made me think of that section there. To like she needed like the drama and the problems in her life. She couldn't handle having like a good relationship with a good man.
In the WCG, the idea of women needing to be submissive and be entirely focused on making their husband happy and being the sole caregiver or being the main caregiver to the children and to remove that burden from the man was kind of how I always took it growing up. Um, yeah, do you have anything that you just got the vibe of or that you directly remember from WCG conditioning around that?
Yeah, it does limit on both ends. I feel like when it came to our parents, I don't know how I viewed marriage at all because looking at them, yes, they were always together. They always did the traditional roles, but they just looked blah. They just looked like, did they enjoy each other at all? Or were they just trying so hard to please God and step into their roles that they just, yeah, they had no individualism at all. I don't remember mom standing up to dad except for once, and that was when he went to started listening to Brother Stare, and he said, "Oh, we're gonna move out to South Carolina so that we can join
That's
this
right.
commune." That was the only time I've ever seen her stand up to him.
It's true. And I think she's just very lucky, honestly, that he never was a man to take disgusting advantage of his position of power over her.
Yeah.
Like he definitely was head of household yeah, he was definitely head of household and made all the decisions and things, but I never felt like he was doing things without taking her well-being into consideration. Like I don't
Right.
think he would do
Hmm.
something knowing that she was very upset about it. But
Right.
by the same token, she was so conditioned through her own life experience to be a doormat to where I don't think that she would even raise the issue if she did have a concern about something.
That's
I
a good
think she'd
point.
just be like, well, I guess I'm just going to go with this because it's not my decision to make. So it's weird. It's like when a woman is conditioned enough to totally put her head down and just accept things, the man doesn't have to be mean. And so, Armstrong was onto something with that. Like, we can actually avoid men being terrible brutes if we just, get the women in line enough. Well, that's what he thought. But I actually don't think it's true. Like, I think men who are going to harm women are going to do it because they're soothing something for themselves, from their own pain and
Right.
trauma and conditioning. And it's not like the woman actually did something wrong or, but I do think if a woman knows not to fight back, it's probably going to go better for her in some cases. That's
We're taught
terrible.
to fight
Fucking
back.
terrible.
I
I
know.
mean, can you imagine? We have both been very lucky in our relationships, you and I, but
Yeah.
can you imagine like not knowing if the next thing you say to him is going to get you hit?
I know.
I, and
Breaks my heart.
so many women went through it and it was made okay. Like that's the thing about the WCG. Again, it is not just the WCG, but we know for a fact it happened in the WCG. And we
Mm.
mentioned Donna, who we interviewed, sweet Donna. She was married and her husband beat her mercilessly. She went to the pastor about it looking for some help, right? Like
Hmm.
this was, late 70s, early 80s or something, I think. And the pastor told her that she needed to learn to be quiet. So that tells me she was fighting back. And then he took her husband out for a beer. So,
Hmm. To have a
yeah.
chat. Have a little boys chat, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Probably had some good discussion on how to control the simple female. Because
Hmm.
that, honestly, that is how the Worldwide Church of God put it forth. That it wasn't just like, these are your God-given roles, even though they said that. It was definitely intimated completely that women were less intelligent and less capable also.
Yeah.
Right.
Hmm.
And therein lies the problem, because obviously neither of those are true.
Right.
Mhm. Yeah. It's interesting though, like I think when we're talking about the WCG and its impact, it's very easy to look at adult stories, like people who were adults in the WCG and dealing like Donna with her marriages in the WCG. But like there's people like us who were never adults in the church. And
Hmm.
yet the conditioning, the gender role conditioning, um, that was done to us as children still set us up to struggle in our life with our marriages and stuff. And I feel like it's not just women also, right? Like the men were also conditioned into this. And I think along with, the fact of how men and women were conditioned separately in the WCG, it also kind of took everybody's autonomy away,
Hmm.
to where um like it limited the self-expression of every gender and forcing them to like fit into these tiny little molds, these little narrow definitions of how to be a man or how to be a woman. And so that individuality and the ability to think that I'm good and I'm special as I am, no matter what, didn't exist. So a lot of kids went through just thinking they were fucking worthless. And they brought that into their marriages. In fact, I have a story that I'll read here from our good friend JJ, who does social media for our channel.
Love it. Yes.
Okay, so JJ says, okay, raised in the WCG in the 80s as a little boy, I was so well trained to be obedient. My father wasn't a part of the church and hands off as a parent unless it came to spanking. Otherwise raised by my mother and grandmother in the church. After leaving the church at 16 and graduating high school, I met my ex-wife in my early 20s. There was quite a lot of verbal abuse from the very beginning towards me, but I thought it was going to get better, especially once we moved in together. Then she got pregnant with my daughter and we got married. All the while, I was still very submissive and wouldn't stand up for myself. So this
Yep.
is WCG conditioning directly impacting someone as an adult. Okay. Okay, I was submissive and wouldn't stand up for myself because we were taught that. If I
Mm.
ever did, the backlash was always very physical. I knew she was messing around with other men and using meth. Confronting her, I would be physically assaulted, get a black eye, etc. I would try to hide the truth for some time from any family or friends. Because of my programming to be submissive, to be obedient to a God. You get what you get in this life because you don't deserve anything more. So that wife, if she beats you, is still a gift. Fortunately, I got out after my daughter was a year old and took her out of that situation.
Wow.
Oh, it continues.
Mm.
This harm is fucking real. Years later, after returning to a Pentecostal church, I met my second ex-wife. This woman was very controlling, a complete narcissist. I had to fit into this man of God box within her family. My daughter left to go live with her mom in Utah because it got so controlling with her ex-stepmother. I still had to be obedient, and she took full advantage. Finally, after a couple of years, she gave me an ultimatum to give her a baby, or she had no choice to file for divorce. Thankfully, I didn't continue to conform.
And that's coming from a man.
And but I mean, it was a man then dealing with the repercussions of his own upbringing in the Worldwide Church of God and how that affected him throughout his life, making him be submissive. And that is it's interesting because that was taught as children to us, but he never got the final part of it, right? That was like, so now you are this large and in charge dude.
That's a very good point.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It was like he was still his younger self
But that
and
is how
still.
that works. If we experience these terrible traumas that prevent us from developing some of our autonomous, related skills, we are just going to land in a place where we're stuck in those traumas and they're going to keep like it's like a little hurt part of us, right?
Mhm.
And when something comes along that reminds that little part of us of that thing that happened, it's like, whoa, remember when that happened? Here's how you got to behave. Ooh, this is how we stop that from happening again, right? So it's like those anxieties come up and cause us to behave in ways that don't necessarily make sense to the real situation and how the people are then, but it happens because it's that part that's remembering how it used to be and it's still stuck there, right? So until we hold space for those hurt parts of us, those things are going to keep coming up and making us behave in ways we don't want to because that
Mhm.
part is trying to stop the trauma that it is still experiencing.
We're so vulnerable. All of us are so vulnerable, and it's not just women.
In addition to the specific gender roles and the inability that we had to do any kind of self-expression, I think that has so much more far-reaching effects than just choosing our partner. But
Mhm.
obviously, that one affects us hugely.
You and I have been very fortunate, pets. Yes.
It's true. I mean, I think you and I exist in this space where we did receive the harm, but it wasn't
Mm.
like it was bad, and I'll call it out, and I will continue to do that. But I think that we had enough of the like strong support and kindness and love from our
Mhm.
parents too, like in their own way. They weren't like mean and horrible and ignoring of us.
Mhm.
They just did these abusive parenting tactics. And
Right.
so I think that meant that we arrived in our adulthood with less of that, oh, I have to conform myself to be what this person wants in order for them to love me. I
Yeah.
think that's what a lot of people come out of that with. And I think we were seen as individuals by our parents enough that I think we didn't get that piece. You know what I'm saying? And so in
Right.
some
Okay.
ways, yeah. And so in some ways, the fact that we had that care and support meant that our traumas are something we can maybe like see and work with
Mhm.
versus it just taking us over and and making us do things that our I don't know, our calmer brain wouldn't do.
Mhm. Yeah.
And so in some ways that's why we're doing what we're doing because we experienced it enough to see it and get it. But we're also not so traumatized that we can't call it out for what it fucking is.
Right?
Stand
Yeah.
up for the people who got it worse than we did.
Yes.
Mm, God damn it.
And there were so
Mhm.
many that got it worse than us.
When you take it down to the idea that women were actually taught that saying no to their husband for sex or anything else was something they weren't allowed to do, I mean, you realize why this is a problem,
Hmm.
and talk about entitled men, men that were literally taught, well, that you're the masters of the universe and this woman will like take care of all of your needs.
Hmm.
What?
Good luck. No one can take care of someone else's needs. All of them. That's just not possible. That's a
Exactly.
lot of pressure. Like, really? We're supposed to, first of all, we're supposed to what? Turn 18 and all of a sudden pick who our partner is going to be for our entire lives. And then we put on the pressure expecting this person to take care of all of our needs, vice versa on both sides. They think that's going to work?
Especially when we're going into that situation without our full capacity because we had so much of our own um, abilities and rationality squashed and taken from us by the high control environment.
Yeah.
You don't get to critically think when you're in a place of only obedience.
Could have been bad for both of us, but I love that, you got married at a relatively young age. You both were evangelical Christians at the time and it ended up working out. But I think in my situation it worked out because I was older when I got married. I was in my mid 30s, already lived a relatively great life up to that point, and I knew who I was. I knew who I wanted. And that's why Suman stood out, so much from the rest of them. I'm like, oh, this one's different. I'm finally at a place where, like, hey, I'm comfortable with my life. I'm enjoying my life. I'm independent, doing my own things. There's just, I have a partner now to do them with. And that's the way it should be. Not
Well,
just,
right.
I feel like marriage has always been, the man is looking for a wife. It doesn't really seem to matter to them who that wife is, just someone who's pretty, who can clean and cook and take care of their needs and in all manners, and that it was like that was it, right? I
Well,
mean,
yeah, especially having the oven to make sure that there's babies produced that belong to him.
yes.
But this is maybe the moment for that discussion on lineage because I feel like the lineage thing was more important to Herbie in the WCG than it is when we see gender roles kind of throughout the rest of society and
Right.
evangelical churches and stuff. Like it was very, very seriously about that in the WCG.
Well, I mean, doesn't that kind of go back to the Puritans coming over and what like looking for records on like where was our origins and where did we
Hmm.
end up? That just continued on.
Well, it's like, I don't know if it's from Rome, but it's the idea of bloodlines, the idea of lineage and how important that is. And it's funny to realize how that is totally a Western construct.
Hmm.
On other continents outside of Europe, that's not a thing.
Yep.
Like there are people groups where that are very matriarchal, where the women get to decide what man gets to share her living quarters with her, and like
Outstanding.
basically no one knows who the parentage of the babies are
Hmm.
because kids just kind of get raised communally. Like obviously they know the mother, but you know what I'm saying? Like
Hmm.
we think we have this ideal model But it's like, hi, there's other family models that have been going a lot longer than
Mhm.
your picket fence bullshit, you know?
Right. In
Yeah.
India, I don't think they really give a shit about that. And bloodlines. I mean, they kind of know where they come from, you know. My husband knows who his grandfather is, and his parents are first cousins, by the way. Yeah, that's still a thing. Arranged marriage is still a thing. And what happens is typically, if it is an arranged marriage, I mean, it's perfectly acceptable to ask someone, is it arranged marriage or is it a love marriage? If it's going to be arranged, which it just sounds like a lot of Indians don't really seem to care, that's just what they do. The parents kind of set it up. You know, they find someone for their child who's of like a similar or same caste, same background. Patels, they all marry each other. That's just how it is. And they're just like, oh, it's just marriage. Like, why does love have to be a factor? That's kind of a
Yeah.
crazy concept to you and I, but the fact of like, yeah, marriage for life. Okay. So what? We have a whirlwind romance, a steamy one, and then all of a sudden they get married because they're in love, and then it just kind of slowly fizzles out. It
Hmm.
would make sense that, you know, there would be an arranged marriage aspect where you kind of slowly fall in love with your partner. I don't know. I guess it doesn't really matter either way. People can have long, happy marriages, and it doesn't have to be any one particular style.
Right. And I think that's where we really are bringing value to this conversation about that is the idea that, you know, we have this ideal in our head, and that was the WCG thing, like God's true plan or whatever. What would he say? God's God's purpose for your lives. I don't know, whatever. You know, just junk to try to say that there's one way and I'm the one who knows it, right? I mean, that's the whole thing. It's a control method. But it's so important then to recognize like how different people on different continents live, how things, you know, just like throughout history, how it's been different. Like break ourselves of our Western white centric paradigms and look at what actually exists. And I think we'll just be doing a whole lot better for humanity because clearly this high control model is not creating healthy relationships.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We're
Herbert
still
W. Armstrong was wrong.
no pass. There's a book out there that says he was right. So
Okay,
clearly he was
whatever.
right.
Yeah, sure, because the book said it. Yeah, that's kind of what got us here in the first place.
I don't even know how to pinpoint this. Like there's so many different directions. Sorry, go ahead.
I know. This is not just the WCG, though. I mean, I, it's just the same as we say everything, right? With evangelicalism, it's been prettied up, fluffied up, maple syrup poured all over it. It's the same thing when you're talking about gender roles as they're presented in evangelical and other Christian church spaces.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same problem.
Yeah.
It's been prettied up. It still is women get in the kitchen, women serve your men, but they soften their language. They try to okay, so there was this whole idea back in the day, I remember from evangelical churches talking about like why did God take Adam's rib from his side to make Eve, right? Because it kind of sounds bad, this idea that God made a man and then took one little piece and made the other half too, right? Like that's terrible. And so, because that's the game the evangelical churches play, is they take absolute terrible horseshit, controlling bullshit from the Bible that has been said in Christian churches for all this time. And then they're like, how can we say it without actually saying it so we can keep them attending and keep getting their money? Hmm, right? And so that's how they do it. They soften it up by saying things like the rib, you know, the rib, Eve being made from the rib. Why was Eve made from the rib? Not from his head to lord over him, not from his feet to be trampled by him, but from his rib to be under his arm, to be safe and protected, and to walk side by side with him. Okay, that is a pile of horse shit evangelical apologetics if I ever heard it.
Where did you hear that?
Oh, just back in the day, somewhere between end of high school, early college, evangelical people.
Trump's voice is resonating in my mind right now. I'm going to protect women whether they like it or not.
Fuck off.
The only thing he's protected is his ego.
So that's how evangelicalism does the same shit, and they just make you feel ever so slightly better about it. Cool, huh? So here's the second piece to that evangelical model. Like, it's a fluffy version of the WCG, but also I have discovered there's been a backlash as it's kind of like rolled through multiple generations in the evangelical church. It seems it has made a whole bunch of men who have learned to be submissive and evangelical wives who have learned to drive from underneath.
Explain what that means, Pets,
Okay, I
because,
don't know if that's the right way to say it. And a
well,
whole
Urban
bunch of
Dictionary.
women, yeah, well, a whole bunch of women who have figured out how to drive from the passenger seat, right? So they're using the fact that she's supposed to be submissive to him, but that he's supposed to be a godly man to actually kind of like flip that on its head and keep him in line. So I was talking to that same friend, JJ, and he had a story to share about that second wife, the one that was emotionally abusive,
Uh-huh.
where she came from a like deeply evangelical background. And it was like kind of on an island in an island community. So it was kind of like some, in my opinion, some like things had sort of festered there, because they were kind of isolated out on their island. But what it seems like is if kids got well enough taught to be submissive, it started to be that the boys who were taught to be submissive were carrying that forward such that they were becoming very submissive husbands, and the women were figuring out that they could control the husband, but
Mm-hmm.
like in what I would say is probably more like passive aggressive manipulative ways, because that's the path that was made available to them by
Mm-hmm.
way of evangelicalism. Because there's so much passive aggressive shit that you can slide under the radar of saying something that's, very Christian, um, that does still act to control other people. Yeah. So, JJ, so in particular, JJ had one story of his ex-wife's parents at the time, or no, his now ex-wife's parents sitting him down and having a talk with him about how he wasn't behaving good enough as a Christian husband. And that he understood at that point, looking at his wife's sister's husbands and everything too, that his job in that marriage as a Christian husband was to make the bacon and put his head down and say, "Yes, honey." And
Seriously?
so, yeah. And so it's funny to realize that like power just does that, like the patriarchy intended for all of that power to go to the men. And so it's kind of funny to see how there's like almost been this little boomerang effect by evangelical control traveling through the generations in church.
Mm-hmm.
And it's sorry for this triggering word, but I felt like what I was hearing described was what in high school I would have heard called as being a pussy whipped guy, right? Um, it was like that measure of control somehow just keeps moving on, right? Like those women
Right.
now, maybe they feel more liberated, but it's still within this tiny window. Like they're still operating their power, banking on it being that they can use their husband's power, right? It's like
Yeah.
not really their power. And that I think is how in our country, white women in general are taught, like that you get your power from the man you're attached to.
Oh, you're not so and so. You're so and so's wife.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so women, because we learn and grow and evolve, in some cases figured out that that was where they had power then, and that they could yield or that they could wield the power of their husband. And if that's the only power you have, you're going to use it. Even if it's right back to control the husband, as it seems happens sometimes. So, yeah, I mean, when we control others, when we take away their autonomy, we are causing so many more problems for those people and for ourselves and for the whole society that those people are living in, because that's the same one we live in. Yeah, I guess it's just the general idea um, that this kind of binary being enforced on human beings means that where we land, like all of that emotional suppression, lands us in a place of being unable to have healthy relationships, right? So it's like what we think we're supposed to get from a relationship is totally distorted. And we
Hmm.
don't get access to even know how we could have a healthy relationship. And we're,
Yeah.
if we're not in a place of knowing what a healthy relationship looks like, we're probably gonna pick the wrong one.
And how are we supposed to have all this knowledge in our, you know, late teens, early 20s before we even have sex with anyone? Nope, we're not going to. For life, Pats. I'm still blown away by this concept.
Yeah, for
The
life.
churches want us to find our partner for life before we have sex, before we really have these adult relationships that really shape who we are, how we figure out who we are. Like they're expecting people to get married like before they go to college and all this and have babies and oh, the man can go to college. I mean, in a perfect setting for some of these evangelicals. They think, oh yeah, the wife just stays at home and raises the babies while the man is going off to college and doing all this crap. Everything's set at home, and once he's bored with her, he's got a mistress on the side. Boom.
Perfect system, huh?
I don't know why the movie Mona Lisa is coming into my mind right now. Yeah.
Oh, Mona Lisa smile. Yeah, I can see that.
Mona Lisa Smile. Excuse me. Yeah. Why
Yeah.
the movie Mona Lisa Smile is coming into my mind right now. Yeah. I just think about the one character, Kirsten Dunst's character, where she plays by all the rules, She does what her very controlling and narcissistic mother wants her to do, and she ends up marrying someone suitable, and he does what? Leaves her at home to take care of everything while he goes off with his mistress. And she's not allowed to question him at all. Nothing.
That's a good point. The not allowed to question. Like we talked about that when it's like in terms of kids and raising kids, kids not being allowed to question, just obey the rules or you get hit. Like that's a problem. But yeah, that continues.
The other person is there as a partner to help them along in this process of life. And if they're not allowed to ask questions, what in the fuck are they doing in the relationship at all?
You know what? A person who doesn't let you question them at all is a very, very insecure person.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes. Hmm.
right? Because they're that convinced that they don't have it all worked out, that they don't have it right, that any tiny little hint of maybe it's not quite right will throw them into a tailspin,
Yeah.
instead of having that resiliency to be like, oh, gosh, you're right. I should work on that for myself. Like
Hmm.
there's a softness and a openness to learning and a resiliency to failure that we gain when we aren't so controlled. When we're allowed to make mistakes and to learn from them and to realize we're not bad because we made mistakes. Like all of that puts us in a place where we are going to be able to stand up for our own needs,
Hmm.
because we've actually been allowed to understand our own needs instead of just like, excuse me, you're not doing what those other people said, you know?
Yeah.
It's everything's connected, right? I can't fully
It
separate out
really,
any of these
it really
topics.
is.
Yeah.
No, no, you're right. They are all connected.
Hmm.
There's no, I, I mean, there's different variations to it, but as a whole, yeah, we all end up in the same place, don't we?
Hmm. Well, and all of it adds up to not knowing who you are, right? Where every control method is to take away your individuality. Because if they take away your individuality, you aren't going to do things outside of what everyone else is doing.
Yeah.
Boom. You know? So be the good Christian girl so that you can be the good Christian wife. And that's how you stay safe.
That sounds extremely unpleasant. Sounds like
It
something I don't want at all.
Right, but wouldn't you contrive to be the good Christian wife if the alternative was like living on the street or going to jail or being murdered? You would figure out how to be a good Christian wife.
I mean, yeah, yeah.
And that's what lifelong indoctrination does. I mean, they don't even have to say, do this or you die with a gun to your head. It's so
Hmm.
much more subtle and takes place over a lot of years. So, I mean, that's how women were okay with that.
Yeah.
Not okay with it, but it is what it is. So you just shut up and you don't
Uh,
think you expect anything better. These are ideas we are hearing over and over from people we've connected with through the channel. So, I mean, yeah, it's like, it's almost dehumanizing, you
no, it
know?
is dehumanizing.
hmm Right. To take away autonomy means like you don't get to know who you are. Well, I'm a human. Well, no, you're not. You're my property.
Yeah.
No, you're not. You're a mom. No, you're not. You do this other thing. No, I'm me.
Yeah. Getting back to these gender roles, it always used to piss me off in the military. And this is going to sound strange, but I hated being treated like a woman. Does that make sense? If I were to describe it kind of as like I had a lot of male friends, okay? Um I loved going to the bar with them after hours just to shoot the shit. But it was like I couldn't do that. They treated me like a woman. They censored what they were saying, like, oh, there's a woman here. I guess I can't make dick jokes and all that kind of stuff and talk about women. I'm like, what are you doing? Like, treat me just like a friend. Don't treat me as if I'm somehow like this fragile thing. And I don't even know if I'm explaining it right, but men would act differently around me. I'll give you an example. So we had a training one time, all dudes. There was just two women, me and another woman, right? So of course we kind of stuck by each other and what could we do? That we were the only two females there. And yeah, the men acted different, and they said so to be like, well, if we didn't have two ladies here, I would tell you this story about, blah, 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 and I was like, tell the fucking story. What's wrong with you? Why are you acting as though I can't handle whatever you're gonna say? It,
And don't you think if he's about to tell a story that isn't appropriate for human females to hear, maybe it's not a story that should be told at all? Like, if it's offensive, dude, like consider why you want to tell that story at all.
I hated being treated as, yeah, a lesser gender, a weaker gender. Like, just
Right.
talk to me the way that you would talk to your bros, and I'll let you know if something is inappropriate or not.
You make such a good point, though.
Well, and first of all, I hated being treated as if I was some kind of sexual object. I think all women hate that, right? Um, because there were times when I really missed being able to have that community in the military. I was one of the few females in the military and surrounded by dudes, and I liked having friends. And you know me, I'm a little bit more of a masculine woman, and kind of a bisexual one. I don't mind talking about women together with them. So I just hated being talked like like they would dance around these different topics around me, and I just wanted them to be themselves. I didn't want them to censor themselves. I wanted them to act the way that they do. And I didn't want certain men just to look at me as if I was some kind of a sexual object that they were trying to take back to their barracks that night. I'm like, no, I'm a human being here. I want to, have a great time, have some drinks, and your goal is just to bring me back to your room that night. They're like so disrespectful.
Do you feel like for you, you would interact with people exactly the same, whether they're a man or a woman?
Yes.
See, and I think I've been conditioned enough that I know I behave differently around men and women. But I think you're
Really?
right. Like I think most people, I can't obviously speak for everyone, but the way I observe it and hear about it, it seems to me that for most people, there's like an automatic behavior that is different, that it's
Yeah.
moderated, but we do that all the time. It's a little bit code switching, right?
I
It's
don't
not
think I
like
do that
what
at all. I
I,
don't do that at all.
I don't think you do either.
No, I act
So
exactly the same around my bros as I do the very few female friends that I actually have. I act exactly the same.
I believe you. I think
Yeah.
that's true.
And I hated being treated different simply because I was a woman. Yeah. I Yeah, because like I tended to gravitate more towards men because I acted so much like them. Like give me a good dick joke and all. Like don't be disrespectful to women. Some of them were, but those were the very few.
Hmm.
I just hate the difference in how people are treated depending on their gender. I'm just like treat everyone the same, you know? I don't know why there has to be that different piece there.
Right. I mean, you brought up a little bit ago the weaker sex, and that's literally a thing. They refer to us as the weaker sex. Like, fuck off. Like, okay, if you want to talk muscle tone, fine. Testosterone increases muscle tone. Great. That's about testosterone, not about being a man.
Yeah.
Yeah. But outside of that, you want to talk about strength and weakness? Like, get ready, boys, because you've got some learning to do. Just to cap it off, like, think about this. In patriarchal gender roles kind of stuff,
Hmm.
we are literally telling men that their identity includes being tied to controlling another person. And for women, we're telling them that their identity is tied up in being attached to another person.
No, you're
And
absolutely
and
right.
and this is a thing we are told that we don't have to be told, but it's happened so much now that even if we're not told, we just see it everywhere still. This takes this is going to take very intentional effort by all of us to undo this harmful gender role
Hmm.
problem we have. And the whole point of it, of addressing these gender roles and how we're controlled by churches and society at large, the whole point of addressing that is to free people from that paradigm and let them have access to themselves, their needs, their desires, because when we have access to that and we feel safe enough to ask for it, we are healthier. We make better decisions. We treat each other with kindness. And all those things make a better world. And that's what I want. Don't you want that too? God damn it.
Well, apparently the majority of the US does not, but that's another story.
Wah, wah, wah.
I just had to get that out. Holy fuck, I was holding that in.
That's fine. That seems like the appropriate sentiment, Nancy.
No, if it was the appropriate sentiment, I would have dropped a fart into the microphone.
um,
Hey, you want to see something funny?
sure.
Oh, this is funny too. I took a walk this morning and that was on the side of the train. It's like a Pac-Man blowing a dick. Okay. No.
And here we are sitting in 2024 waiting for the presidency to turn over, and we're women, and we want to highlight the bullshit that currently exists and figure out how we want to fight it. And I'm just a
Oh,
little
we'll
worried that
see.
we're gonna be sitting here and having a whole new little army raised against us in our effort to reclaim our bodily autonomy and autonomy in general, mental autonomy.
You know what comes to mind in this situation? Our father always used the phrase, life's not fair.
Yeah.
Whenever I would not so much complain. I don't think I was really a complainer growing up because, I didn't have much of a voice, but I would say something that I just kind of didn't like, something that I thought could be better. Things that seemed unfair to me, and that was
Well,
always
yeah.
his retort. Life's not fair. It's just like, so I think I got it in my mind just to accept the way that this is the way things are and we can't change them. Because out of all the phrases our dad used, that was the one he used the most. Life's not fair.
It's funny that you're bringing that up with kind of a sour taste in your mouth about
Yeah.
that phrase, because I have gone back to that, remembering that he said all the time, life's not fair. And I feel like in some ways it has helped me. Because while I think that phrase over and over and that sentiment can be used to convince a child that they don't deserve better anyway, so like just get over it, like it's never going to be what you want.
Exactly.
Like yeah, it's a fine line, but I think it can be damaging. But I also think in some ways I did take that to heart, the idea that it's not fair, and I used that in my head looking at the world and went, fuck, it isn't. But what that taught me was if it's going to be more fair, which feels like how it ought to be, like in my body, it feels like it ought to be more fair. But I've had to grapple with that it is not. That is not the world we live in. God's not real, so there's no like perfection fairness unless we fucking make it ourselves. So if we don't like how unfair it is, yeah, life isn't fair. Well, great. Now I know what I need to work on.
I took it the exact opposite way. I took that as a phrase of finality to be like, no, life's not fair. End of discussion. Like you
Isn't
can't
that
change it.
funny?
You can't change it. It's kind of like the way you took purity culture to heart and I didn't at all. Wow, Cass.
Isn't that funny? Yeah, I mean, but that's the thing. Like, words are mushy. This is the thing I will say over and over. That's not fair. That was three words, four if you count the contraction, that you and I took entirely different things from, and it set us on maybe even somewhat different paths,
Hmm.
right? But I think that's why we have to remember that words are mushy. You say something thinking like, "Oh, that's going to be the thing they needed." It's like you don't know. You don't know what a kid brain is putting together from other things they know and how they're really taking that. You could
Right.
be saying that thing thinking you're giving that kid the wisdom that will stick with them for the rest of their life, but in fact, you are giving them their negative self-talk that will be with them for the rest of their life. Like this shit matters. How we treat children matters. How we treat women matters. How we treat LGBTQ people. How we treat people of color. Like, holy fucking shit. We are all working to live on this planet together. And if we're making it terrible or not making it better for somebody, it's more terrible for us too. We make it better for more people, it's better for us too. And how people will push others down to think that makes it better for them, I will never, ever understand.
I don't understand either. When I do good, I feel good. And I can't imagine that anyone else thinks differently. But I guess when insecurity gets in the way, you have to squash other people's confidence to feel good about yourself. I just don't get it.
You got
I
to be
don't
broken first.
get it, Pat.
But
But I feel
people
like,
have to be broken to be in that place. They have to be utterly and totally convinced that they don't have value.
well, a lot of people feel like they don't because of the powers
Yep.
that be that taught them I had no value.
So this is where patriarchy is a problem. All people are taught they don't have value, right? You're taught you have your value because you're a man or whatever, or because you're a pure woman, right? We're taught that we don't have value and then told also you're the big guy in charge.
Hmm.
And so I don't have power, but I can yell and people listen. But I'm also not good enough, but people have to do what I say, and that makes me feel like I'm good enough. So it sets up abuse. So
Hmm.
that person who was taught that they weren't good enough, but taught a way to make other people feel worse. And if that's what you're given, that's what you use.
Mm.
Because, right, it's all kind of a perception thing. So if you can perceive that someone has it worse, you can tell yourself you have it better.
All
Well,
right,
so
what's next?
the second half of this, though, Nancy, the second half of what we're here for today, though, not just lay out the bullshit, because we could do that all day and, have endless interviews of women harmed by the patriarchy. But what we want to do is we want to talk about what it means to reclaim ourselves, to regain our autonomy after it being stolen from us through churches, through the military, through bad relationships.
I mean, we've already kind of covered autonomy. So you mean like in a marital setting or
Yeah,
how
I
do
mean, yeah, out of, in in as women, yeah, in gender roles. How do we, in the face of a society that is still supporting a strictly binary gender role model at its
Hmm.
core, how do we make more spaces for us as women to have our autonomy that is, um, and our sense of self that's not attached to a man? How do we see these structures in place and try to break these structures where they're harming our LGBTQ brothers and sisters and non-binary folks? Where do we step in to break those systems where they're harming people who are BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color? Like, these are things that as white women in American culture, this is on us. Like, it's our job to talk to other white people. It's our job to empower other women and do the damn thing. Like, I can't just sit by. Like, I see this bullshit and I was told the world's not fair and I think that fucking sucks and it should be more fair. So for me, reclaiming who I am and feeling strong enough to be me unapologetically, for me, that came when I stood up for other people.
Well, I can give you the goal, even though it's not easy to get to, but I'd say the goal is demolish Christianity and other organizations that support the patriarchy and traditional gender roles.
What
But
about
there's a lot of steps to get there.
it's
Like,
true. And I mean, depending on what circles you're in talking about these things, there's ideas out there around gender abolition.
can you explain that a little more?
Yeah, I'll look it up.
Gender abolition. I mean, it'd be nice to start over.
To start over, that's an interesting idea.
Oh, it would just be nice to start over. Like, who the fuck decided that wearing skirts was a female thing? You know?
Right?
Why?
Exactly. It's all just pieces of fabric. And in different cultures and in different times, it was men wearing things that were very robe and dress like.
Kilts.
Yes. Isn't it silly? This is the thing. It's like, oh, you put together a couple of syllables and oh, it's bad now. Oh, you stitch together the fabric in that way without a seam there and it's bad? Like, fuck off.
Kilts,
Okay.
lungis. I mean, all over the world. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think the gender abolition thing is more the idea of it's kind of like a social movement to help us move away from a strict binary, at least.
Hmm.
Because it's true, like so many kids are gender bendy as fuck right now.
Hmm.
Like it is just a thing that's happening in humans. And so for us to like think we have to refer to everything as he or she, like we gotta let that go. Right? And it's like we make assumptions about someone's accomplishments because it's got a he or a she name. Or, it's like we make all of these rules, assumptions, control of each other, all based on that gender assignment.
Yeah. Yeah.
And people are just so much more than that, that to keep calling them out by that as like the number one defining feature that is, by the way, usually covered up with our clothing. Like
Hmm.
maybe we can let it go and recognize that those parts only really matter when you're getting medical treatment or making or having a baby. Like
True. True.
ugh. And even if there's certain ways that we are because we're a girl or a boy or a woman or a man, like great, that means you have like most of that particular constellation of features. It's not of behaviors.
Hmm. Right.
Like you talk about being more masculine,
Yeah. I am.
but it's so much easier for a woman to have masculine traits than it is for a man to have feminine traits
You're
because
right.
of toxic fucking patriarchy.
You're absolutely right. Yes.
hmm
Yeah.
I mean, I think
I don't think it's ever caused me. really any issues to be a little bit more of a masculine woman. In fact, I've had a lot of great male friends because of it. But the
Hmm.
thing that has thrown me off is when I think I have a great time hanging out with my male friends, and then I realize they really only hanging out with me just so they could get into my pants. Like, where the fuck did that come from? Like, really? I'm just completely, thrown off by that. I'm like, really? That's really the only reason you were hanging out with me?
It's kind of frustrating. It's like,
It's very
actually,
frustrating.
well, yeah, like I'm an interesting person. I'm a good friend. I'm
Hmm.
fun to hang out with. Like, and I'm fun in places that aren't just that, 4-inch tunnel.
Is it only 4 inches?
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's more than that, but whatever. But right, that is infuriating. That is infuriating to be to have that full understanding of like, oh, you don't actually see me as anything except for a place to put your cum.
Yeah, clearing barrel. Yep.
It's disgusting.
Yeah.
Like
I mean, but on the other
it
hand, I'm being a little bit biased here because I've slept with quite a few people that like I wasn't interested in anything except their cocks. So there were people I just wanted a hot one night stand. Sometimes you just be like, you look at a person like, I mean, that's just somebody kind of for a one night stand, you know? So I get that sometimes men come out and say, well, you women actually do the same things. I get it. And maybe that's the more masculine traits coming out of me. Be like, yes, I could absolutely be sexually expressive and not have any romantic interest. No problem. That was
no,
no.
here's the thing though. I think it's true that some men and some women do that, do sexually feel that way. I think
Mhm.
some men and some women, I'll just include non-binary folks too, also don't feel that way, right? So like I would say there's a spectrum for all the genders, right? To be more like one night stand or more committed relationship. And so what that tells me is that feature of humans, how we land on how we want to do the sex, is more about who we are and our upbringing and everything, and less, somewhat because of hormones, but less about our gender. And
Mhm.
it's the patriarchy and its assigned gender roles that is making us feel like it's completely dichotomous, right? And it gives men permission to behave so shitty. It gives men permission to not see a woman as a full human being.
Mhm.
Fucked up shit. I mean, part of this process, if we've been hurt by patriarchy, which honestly no one hasn't been hurt by it, but
Mhm.
the things that we need to go through is probably a lot of self-reflection, and there's a lot of resources out there. You
Mhm.
know, like Freedom from Religion Foundation and other ex-cult and ex-religious organizations are there for you, and they understand what people of all genders have gone through because of patriarchy's enforced binary roles. They understand the interplay of religion and fear of hell and everything into that. And so there are places to start to inform ourselves, to start to recognize it's okay to think differently than what we were taught growing up.
I feel like we were getting to that point, and hopefully we still are, is just now with this latest election, I just feel like we could get so close to the finish line to finally say, oh, I feel like it's a little more fair now, only to be sent all the way back to the beginning and then more obstacles in your way. So now you have to do the whole thing again and try to get to the finish line. It's like, well, if we keep getting pushed back, it gets that much more discouraging.
It's
That's
true,
when we
but
have to fight the hardest because people want that control. They want to put you back at the start, not the finish line.
why do
They
they
want to
want
stay
that?
because they want to stay at the finish line. They don't want other people to be at the finish line. If you're rich, you don't want other people to be rich because then you lose your status. You don't want your wife to be confident because and speak for herself. Otherwise, other men might notice that and you could
Oh, she
lose her.
might not want me anymore. Yeah.
Ah, she might not want me anymore.
So it's
Yes.
actually insecurity on the part of the man. That's
Well,
what you're saying.
correct. Yes.
So, I mean, this is where patriarchy hurts men too, because it makes them think they're rulers of the universe and doesn't teach them that they have responsibilities to other humans.
I have a random thought, and I think we've talked about this before, but why are weak men called pussies? And when they display strength, we say, "Oh, dude, you got some balls." When really it's the exact opposite. Explain that.
Explain that?
Pussies
Oh,
are strong, balls are weak. So let's explain that. Come on, Pats. You're
it's
always so good with
patriarchy.
words.
It's just patriarchy. It's like Armstrong saying that the egg was lifeless and stuff, a woman's egg, but the sperm, oh, it got all that life in it. When he's actually wrong. It's the sperm that's not living and the egg that is. Right? It's using words to push a narrative. So you keep saying don't be a pussy and you mean being weak, you're going to reinforce the idea that it's bad to be a pussy and that being a pussy is weak. It's just language. It's language that is irrespective of reality. And
And
that's
pussy's
what,
like the strongest things out there.
but listen, that's propaganda. That's propaganda. You attach feelings to words and then you hammer the word over and fucking over until people get that feeling in their bodies.
That feeling?
Let's think about that. Because, right, you know what a pussy can do? Pussy can handle pushing a baby out, and then it can still fuck after that.
And handle dick sizes that most men don't have.
Yep. And balls are soft and squishy and sensitive, and a good swift kick can make him drop to the ground.
How do we not have a matriarchal society right now? I mean,
Testosterone and
I
nothing
feel
else
like
to counteract it.
feel like in a general sense, women are stronger in absolutely every aspect except for the physical. And I'm not saying there's not exceptions to the rule. There are some women who would kick men's asses. But I'm saying in a general sense, aside from physical, we seem to be stronger in like every single area. Despite people calling us emotional, I think we're so much stronger.
Oh, I think our emotions can be our strength if we know how to handle them. I
We
think we
do.
are not taught to handle our emotions, and so they overwhelm us and cause us to behave in unfortunate ways. But if we are instead taught to hold space for our emotions and to receive our emotions as feedback to us about how we're feeling about something, to help us understand, oh, I must be feeling that way because of this, or I have this feeling because of this memory. Like, all those feelings are there for a reason, and they are feedback to us to use our goddamn brains to decide what those feelings are telling us. But
Mhm.
instead, we aren't like taught about our feelings. And so the feelings come up and they just completely overwhelm us and they like drag us around. Yeah. But that's because, as part of the patriarchy, feelings are bad. You're not allowed to have feelings. Women are made to feel like they're not okay because they're emotional. And then if there's a guy who
And are
actually,
too.
well, yeah,
Anger's an
especially
emotion. Aggression's an
that's
emotion.
that's the only one they're allowed to have. That is a good point. When we're talking about emotions, they're not okay unless you're a man and you're angry. Then it's allowed.
Hmm.
So, like, we wonder why these things build up. Why do we have these ideas around men flying off the handle and being more angry than women? Because we fucking let them. Because
Mm-hmm.
we as a society told them that's how they would behave, just like we told them that they were predators and couldn't help themselves when a beautiful woman was around, and therefore she had to be the one to keep things covered so that his predator didn't get activated.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same damn thing. We've told them that men have this, they're warriors and they're fighters and they have all this anger that's okay because it's used for fighting and that's for protecting their wife.
And yet the show Xena was so much more popular than Hercules was. But Dad was, I guess, starting to get curious. Why am I watching Xena so much? And he actually sat down and watched an episode with me, which I thought was surprising. I'm like, "Oh, hey, you're gonna join me for this?" And he's like, "Well, I want to see what the show's about." Like, probably just pinpointing, things of like he didn't like about it. But, partway through one of the episodes, he's just like, Man, they really make men look like idiots, don't they? That's what he said. And I thought what I wanted to say was, well, most of the time men make women look like idiots,
Oh.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Like prissy
It's well,
little.
that's just assumed though. That's the norm. That's why it didn't that's why it doesn't stand out. And when it was done the other direction, he was like, "Well, wait, what the fuck? I don't like that."
Because
Yeah.
yeah. I also saw this short video clip. I think it was on Instagram somewhere. Like it was the very famous scene in the movie Psycho, the original Psycho, where the woman is in the shower and she screams her head off and then gets stabbed. Well, somebody decided to gender switch it. They stuck a man in that place. Like, how does it look when a man's doing it, huh? Does he look ridiculous? Yeah, that's how us females feel when you make us look like we're just helpless damsels in distress and we're just reacting with our emotions and no actions necessary. I guess that's how we are. Actually, that's a quote from Xena too. Like, act, don't react.
Boy, this shit goes deeper than either of us really have awareness of, I think, or yeah, insights into.
Yeah, now I'm just on that kick now because I'm thinking about little things here and there, and my ADHD brain is going in all these different directions. I'm like, oh, but I see this little example over here and this example over here, so maybe that pertains to it. Oh, let me think on that. It's amazing how those little things stick out in our minds. My own father saying, "Real, they really make men look like idiots." Did you like does he think for a moment that us women aren't portrayed like we're fucking idiots and weaklings and don't know how to do anything? I'm sorry, in a general sense, we're not as physically strong. So what?
I will say that I think men are every bit as wonderful, amazing, um, powerful, hardworking,
Mhm. Yeah.
compassionate, emotional as women, but because we tell them that they are this other way and that they are the top of the food chain, we actually do them a disservice. I
Hmm.
think we make them less happy, less fulfilled. I think we make them afraid of not meeting what it is that they're supposed to be, because do they all feel like they're masters of the universe? Probably not. And I think we make them behave in um, immature and unfortunate ways. And that is maybe the problem, is we are missed as humans,
Hmm.
um, because female gets in the way of being like, no, me, a human,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And maybe ultimately that's the biggest problem of all. And so perhaps our reclaiming, um, while it will definitely be female empowerment of ourselves and of each other, of other females, other women, it's also definitely about us reclaiming our humanity and
Hmm.
to recognize I'm a human first. Like, yes, I have an identity as a human that is woman, female. That's fine. But that's a subcategory of human. And can we see each other as humans first, please? Because I'm living on this planet with 8 billion humans. Like, there is no God with a great plan.
Tell
It's
tell that to half the world.
I know, but this is why I'm leaning so much more into anti-theism lately, because if we actually accept there is no God here, like it's just us, if we don't have that stupid dumbass idea put in our head in the first place and we just know that it is what it is because we can actually see it.
That is
Well,
the goal.
but if we're in that place, then there's so many less distractions keeping us from making our world better.
I
I
know.
mean, it's true. It's like it has just been a distraction, this Christianity thing, making us believe that there's this way to be good and to have things work out.
When you've been on top for so long, that better world is now. They don't want it to
It
change.
it's now. If we decide to live in it, the better world is now. We talk a lot about the world tomorrow, including Unpack It TV. Um, we talk about the world tomorrow, But there's nobody coming to do that for us. It's us. And if we want a better tomorrow, start fucking seeing every human as a human today.
As something to contribute, all of us. We take away the stereotypes. Yeah.
That brings Nancy and I to the end of another topic in our series on autonomy. Remember that you are worthy of autonomy, mutual respect, and equality. Keep seeking liberation. Until next time. And don't forget to check out the Apostate Sisters on Patreon, where you can support the show. Like and
Like and
subscribe.
subscribe! Yay!